Hello and welcome to Property Matters. I'm Stephen Galpin, and today we're going to be discussing politics in the world of development. Joining me to talk about this is somebody I can't think of anybody better qualified than John Howard, developer, mentor, author.
Chairman of the Conservative Association Ipswich, and then now I'm president.
Right, not biased, not biased at all.
Not biased in the least.
Right, great stuff. Okay, John, we're going to get straight on with the conversation, and what I want to do is just understand government's role and what do you think is right and what's not right. And the first subject is that just lately the government has scrapped all these housing targets. So how are we going to judge what's needed and where's it needed?
Well, they've had to scrap all the targets, basically, because the targets of 300,000, which is what they were talking about, have never been met ever. No. The best they've done is 235,000 houses. This year it'll be less than 200. You've got the major house builders cutting back because they can't sell the houses. So, there's one particular house builder builds 15,000 houses a year normally. This year they're building 9,000. That's a major problem for the government, who are trying to push through and force these local authorities to build more, to allow planning on more property, more houses.
Okay. And do you think that's going to change under a Labour government if we get one?
Well, hopefully we won't get a Labour government. That's the first thing, Stephen. I see you with a smile on your face.
Right. I'm totally apolitical.
Of course you are apolitical. Of course you are apolitical, and rightly so. I would say that whoever's in government, a bit like the NHS, isn't it really? Whoever's in government has got major problems. It's one thing saying you're going to do it, it's another thing doing it. It's very, very hard to force local authorities to allow enough new homes to be built.
But John, when I hear Rishi and Jeremy come out and they're all dressed up in their hard hats and high-vis jackets, and we're going to build. Well, who's we?
Well, it's not them, is it?
No.
The major house builders control 62% of the housing market in the UK, the new homes in the UK. And the problem with that is that they're in control. Just like this year, they've just all decided they're going to build less because they can't sell them. So, in the 1970s, small house builders, and they were considered builders who built less than 250 houses a year, controlled 71% of the housing market.
Yeah,
it's a massive difference.
Sure. I mean, I know here's a number of developers that are actually sort of putting schemes on ice, as it were, because they're so frightened about the escalating costs of materials and labour that they just can't afford to risk. You start building a £500 million skyscraper, you can't suddenly stop halfway because things have gone up, can you? So.
I was on the train today, funnily enough, coming here I bumped into a friend of mine who's building 270 new homes, and he started it 2 years ago, and his costs have gone up 30% during that time.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's a major problem.
Okay. All right, moving on. What we've got is quite often an argument between central government and local government about what should be given in terms of planning permission. Yes. What I'd like to understand from you is how much influence do you think the central government should have over local authorities?
I think it should have 100% control of what's being built, because otherwise you won't get enough built. Because every local authority, when you put an application in, they are constantly trying to stop it happening, in my view. The idea that the government came up with saying, oh, if you put an application in, the premise is you should get it, and you should get it, is just not true. And the local authorities came out last year and said that 91% of all applications are approved. Now, I don't believe that at all. I think it's 91% of applications that they recommend approved, and that's very, very different.
Very different.
Very, very different, and very, very misleading. Very misleading. The problem we have is that no one wants a load of houses built close to them. No. Transport's a problem, highways is a problem, schools is a problem, everything like that, and the infrastructure cannot take it.
No. Well, you see, that leads us on to the next thing, which is NIMBYism, isn't it? Not in my backyard.
Yep.
Now, I hasten to, I don't know whether this is right or not, but there are some commentators that say it's as often as not the conservative Greenbelt areas that are the most guilty of this NIMBYism. And so not in my backyard. You can go and build in the north of England, you can go and build wherever you like, but not here, thank you, not in the green counties. Is that right?
Well, when you consider that there's been more new homes built in the southern counties than anywhere else, I'm not sure it is right. The fact is that there's lots of space up north, but not enough people want to live there. I think the government needs to give people incentives to live up north because there's more space there. If we built on all the brownfield sites in the UK, these are sites that have been used for something else in the past, there'll be little reason to build on any green field, never mind green belts. Greenbelt came in 1948. It was to protect areas of natural beauty. It also, unfortunately, looks after areas that aren't. I mean, I was involved at Cambridge United. We were building a new stadium and we were going to an area which was an old pit. And that was in Greenbelt. Well, that's just bonkers. The only thing you can build in Greenbelt is a park and ride.
Right.
You can tarmac it all, that's fine. Well, the local authority can do that, but no one else can.
Oh, that's amazing. And I mean, I think going on from NIMBYism, do you think again that central government should really put some restrictions on refusal for local authorities? In other words, the local authority should have a really cast iron reason for rejecting something, either a really onerous sort of.
Well, I think the problem we have is 50% of appeals are upheld. 50%. And when you consider that a number of the appeals should never go to appeal, I suppose that, that means that, in other words, some of them have got no chance at all and shouldn't go. So they're probably agreeing 70% of genuine cases. An appeals officer, I think, gets £460 for doing it. It's just not enough. There's a massive backlog. And it just needs to be a better, more professional system.
The overall cost of an appeal is horrendous.
Exactly, but it's not going to the appeal officer, that's for sure.
No. Where's it going? Lawyers?
Lawyers, yeah, planning barristers, obviously, and people like that. The truth is, if you're a very big house builder, you can just about bulldoze, excuse the pun, quite a good one I thought. Bulldoze, you obviously don't think so, bulldoze your way through the planning system and get permission on really big sites because they've got lobbyists who lobby the government. So, for the smaller developer like ourselves, it's much harder, much harder to do.
Well, I have to say, I've told this story before, I think, on PTV, but I mean, I have a friend that's a planning barrister and I got refused some permission out in the country to do something. So, of course, I go to my friend and I say, can we appeal? And he does his usual lawyer thing, holds his hands together and said, well, yes, of course, if you can afford the fees. But he came up with probably one of the best bits of advice I'd ever had. And he said, have you thought about why they've turned your application down? And I said, well, advice. Yeah. So he said, well, it's because they don't like what your architect's drawn. So I said, yeah, fair enough. So he said, why don't you just go back to your architect and tell him to jolly well draw something that they do like? He said it'll be an awful lot cheaper. And I mean, that was a stunning piece of advice from somebody very clever. And I think a lot of people would do well to sort of listen to that, because I think going in for the appeal process these days is hugely expensive.
Well, it's 6 to 12 months of your life.
And 6 to 12 months of your life wondering whether you're going to be successful or not. And of course, being successful or not means whether you've actually perhaps even wasted your money on the site. Which
well, you could have already bought it and all sorts.
Could be catastrophic, couldn't it? Okay. Well, look, just in the finish off the first half of this programme, I also want to ask you something else which is going to affect volumes. And it's, do you think that the government really should intervene with taxpayers' money to help young people get on the housing ladder?
That's a very interesting one, because today, of course, I've heard that there's 1 or 2 building societies coming out with 100% mortgages again, which is interesting.
What a surprise.
What a surprise. And of course, there is a great argument to say that if they're paying more rent than they would on a mortgage, then perhaps they've got a point.
Well,
perhaps they've got a point.
John, I go back to the original cause of this trouble in 2008, 2009, which was the American banks parceling up all these mortgages, getting anybody who could breathe to borrow some money to swell the portfolio, selling it and gone. And I've often said since, I don't know why we had the problem in this country, because it wasn't our people having 100% mortgages that caused the problem.
No, it wasn't. It genuinely wasn't.
And I still say that even if somebody has got very little or no equity in a property, they don't buy it to give the keys back, do they?
The first thing anyone does or should do when they buy a property is get that mortgage paid every month.
Yeah.
What's left, they can do what they want with.
Yeah.
But getting that paid, and of course the Help to Buy is finished, but there's talk now of it coming back, surprise, surprise, because the house builders have lobbied the government and said, look, we're building far too few houses now because of the market. We need a boost. And that's what's going to happen, I expect.
Okay, lovely. All right, well, that's the first half of the show over. So join me again after the break when I'll be discussing more about politics with John Howard. Hello and welcome back to Property Matters. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm joined by John Howard, and we're discussing the role of politics in development. So John, moving on to construction and what we can and can't build, do we think that construction sort of systems and ethics are going to change awfully in the next coming years? We can talk about modular construction. You and I would probably say prefabricated construction.
You probably would.
So timber frame buildings are coming back, aren't
they? I mean, they were the big in the 80s. Barratt Homes, timber frame buildings, weren't they? That was the big thing, wasn't it, in the 80s?
Well, until you couldn't get a mortgage on one.
Well, yeah, but they did improve them after a while.
Okay, so what do we think?
Well, I think the modular, I mean, everyone's banging on about modular, and I have so many, mainly younger people, come to speak to me at different events and say, oh yeah, we're going to do modular. I said, good luck with that. And they said, why is that? I said, well, first you need a 10-year warranty, which they're now getting them more on, building warranty. They're now getting those more. But I said also, they're still costing more than traditional bricks and mortar. And if you've got the two, which one's easy to sell still? And I would say it will change, I'm sure, Stephen, but at the moment I would say traditional house, the way it's built, brick built house, is easy to sell, mortgage and resell. And resell is also very important. If you look at let me ask you a question, Stephen, if I may. How many of the top 10 house builders in the UK are building modular?
Very few.
I would say zero. One of the big boys has just invested 60 odd million into a modular factory along with other investors in the UK. So that tells me they're going to put their toe in the water. But that's all they're doing. Until you get the top 10 building modular homes, it won't take off.
No. And I think, John, if we just go back to the, what should we say, the process in selling a new home. I'm not talking about apartments so much, I'm talking about individual homes. And there's a developer just across the way there who's really got it down to a T. They will, of course, use this business of getting to a sort of 3/4 stage of the construction, calling you up and saying, right, now, how do you want your kitchen? Do you want blue tiles? Do you want red tiles, black tiles, whatever? Would you want this cooker, that cooker, or the other cooker? And of course, they use that as an incentive to get the exchange. And that's an important, actually, and quite critical part of the sales process for
it is at
developers.
The higher level. At the lower level, it can cause all sorts of problems trying to do that. But at the high level, I would agree with you. The argument is, of course, we can build them much quicker. Well, you can, but one of the problems is funding. Because if you're building most of the property house in a factory, it's portable.
Sure.
So who is going to lend money on something that could disappear? When you're building a house, traditionally, you've got foundations and everything else. Now, Homes England, which is the government property bank, and it'll be very interesting to know if Labour do get in, whether they'll get rid of this bank. It's massive. The bank lends billions to housing associations, developers like me, all sorts of people. They do have a system where they will lend a portion of the money off-site, if you like. But it's a very complicated thing because, of course, normally you'd put a first charge on it, the bank would, or they would.
It's a bit hard to charge a sort of modular construction in a factory.
That's going down the M1 somewhere. So It's very difficult. So there's other problems with modular that people perhaps don't think about enough.
Well, it's a logistical problems, isn't it?
Sure.
I mean, even if you're talking about sort of bathrooms that can be craned in, I mean, the actual transportation costs must be quite significant. And again, the storage costs at wherever they're made.
I mean, at the end of the day, they're still more expensive, even now, even after all the 30% increase in build costs, traditional build costs, they're still more expensive to build than the traditional house. And until that changes, I don't think we'll really get motoring with modular.
Is there a labour consideration with modular? I mean, do you need more people, less people, different skilled people?
Yeah, you need less people because building a house is one of the few things now where you still need a lot of physical help. The other thing, of course, is that the argument is, oh, well, it's an eco house and it's worth 20% more than any other house like it. Good luck with that when you're talking to a valuer and a buyer, because you know what? They're all very green until it comes to money.
Well, it's funny. I know we had a conversation not so long ago about whether lenders were actually allowing valuers the freedom to sort of up value to take into account green.
No chance.
It just doesn't happen,
naivety.
does it?
When someone says to me, oh, I'm going to get 20% more, John, will you joint venture with me? You'll do this or do that. Are you crackers?
Yeah.
It's bonkers.
Okay. All right. Well, moving on again. Are we experiencing a cultural change with our youngsters not so desperate to own their own homes anymore?
No. Next one.
Next one. Well, I'm going to pull you back on that one. I mean, if we go into Europe, I mean, they think we're absolutely potty wanting to buy our houses, don't they?
That's why we're not in Europe anymore.
I suppose it is.
Thank God for that.
Mind you, can you name me any good thing from Brexit?
It's all happening. It's all happening.
Is it really?
Keep the faith. Keep the faith. So what I would say about young people, most young people, it's drilled into them in the UK from a very young age. Their parents hopefully own their own home. 64% of people in the UK own their own property. Something like 5 million people own more than one property. It's huge. It's huge. So most people see property in the UK as a long-term investment for their retirement as much as they do a house to live in. Now that's perhaps unhealthy, but that's what they do. They look to buy a terrace, buy a semi, then buy a detached, then when they come to 60 odd or so, we're not, but most people are, downsizing, Stephen, into a smaller home, taking the cash out and giving the cash sometimes, obviously, to the children to go and do the same thing themselves. So we are unique. We've got thousands of lending institutions in the UK that will lend on a residential property. Europe doesn't have that. We've got all the building societies. It's an amazing system that we have in the UK, and unique to the rest of the world, just about.
Well, it is, but I suppose the one, as a house owner, you want it, but as a economic principle, we shouldn't really be relying on house price inflation to make us wealthy.
Well, you and I have done all right out of it over the years. Let's be honest.
Possibly so. But
the next generation, are they going to do so well out of it? I'm not so sure.
No,
but
I'm not.
I'm not so sure. But people want to own their own home. They want that security. They want something to, the other thing is, if you've got a repayment mortgage, by the way, don't have an interest only if you can help it, but repayment mortgage. If you can pay that mortgage off, you pay more than you're meant to on your mortgage, you reduce the 25-year mortgage or whatever you got vastly. It comes down incredibly quickly if you can pay more than you're meant to. You might come down from 25 years to 18 years or 17 years, but it's a huge difference to people. But I still believe people in the UK want to own their own home if they can. Not everyone can, unfortunately, but that's the.
But do you think that motive is lessening?
No.
You don't?
I don't. And the reason I say that is 4% more people, young people, first-time buyers is up 4% this year. Mm-hmm. Who would have thought that? If they bought last year, they'd have got a much cheaper interest rate.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, let's hope any government schemes do help the situation,
I think they will. I think they will.
Okay, fine. Now, look, just to finish the programme off, I want to talk about buy-to-let.
Oh yeah.
Now,
hasn't that finished now, buy-to-let? Is that like help? Is that like Help to Buy?
Well, no, not really. What we've got, I mean, if we go back to the late 80s, we had Margaret Thatcher bring in the assured short-term tenancy, which brought a lot of people wanting to let their properties.
Absolutely.
Because for the first time in God knows how many years, they knew they could get their property back.
Have security.
Yeah. So there was an element of security for the tenant for a fixed period of time, and there was an element of security for the landlord knowing they can get their property back. Now, two things have happened. One, the government now is discouraging the smaller buy-to-let investor
Absolute madness.
Rather penal sort of taxation changes. Also just generally discouraging it, encouraging people to be bigger and buy in limited companies, have a multiple of properties, and in fact go for the institutional landlord. And on top of that, they're sort of discouraging landlords coming back in or staying in by this no-fault eviction business. So if once you're in a property, chances are you're going to be able to stay there unless there's some really extenuating circumstances. So really the government are totally discouraging that end of the market. What do you think?
Just let me check with you. It is a Conservative government, is it we have?
Well, so you tell me.
Because if I see that Michael Gove again, and I do see him on occasions, not often at different events, I'm going to have a right go at him, because this is all down to him. Housing Secretary, Michael Gove. Let me tell you what's going to happen. When you can't get someone out of your property, and you want to sell it, and you say, I'm going to sell it, I'm going to serve notice on the tenant decides not to go, they don't have to go, they can stay forever. That property is worth 30% less than it would be if it was vacant because it's got a tenant in it. No one's cottoned onto that yet. But in the 80s, we were buying lots of blocks of flats at a 30% discount to open market value because you couldn't get the tenants out. We'd then slowly get them out and would sell them for the full money. That's why I'm sitting here, basically. So I wish I was younger because I could take advantage of it all over again.
Well, we can all wish.
We can all wish, can't we? So it's total, utter madness. And if they want to reduce the housing stock in the UK, this is how to do it. The rental stock, it's madness. It makes no sense whatsoever to do it. But I can't see Labour overturning this.
No, I can't.
You know?
Okay, well, John, we've run out of time, so thank you very much
for
coming in and giving the benefit of your wisdom. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you for watching. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Matters.